Hi, I'm Becky Streepy from Glue and Glitter, and today we're making hazelnut crunch bars. Y'all, these vegan chocolate bars are a snap to make. They only take 2 ingredients, no special ingredients required, and I'll also offer some substitutions in case hazelnuts just aren't your thing. All that you need to make these chocolate bars are vegan chocolate chips and hazelnuts. That's it. If you don't love hazelnuts, you can substitute any other nut or seed and it'll work just as well. You can also try other mix-ins in this chocolate bar. My kid and I have made this recipe, but instead of the hazelnuts, we added mini vegan marshmallows. You can also do chopped up dried fruit. You could do a combination of those things. You want to end up with about a quarter cup, maybe even like a scant quarter cup of ingredients when you're thinking about your mix-ins. So this recipe makes enough for 3 chocolate bars, and it does use a chocolate bar mold. If you don't have a chocolate bar mold and don't feel like buying one, that's fine. You can make this more like a chocolate bark and just spread a piece of parchment paper out on a baking sheet, and instead of smoothing the melted chocolate mixture into the molds, you can just spread it out on the baking sheet lined with parchment paper, and then when it's chilled, break it into pieces. That's totally fine. I just like the look of these bars, but it will taste the same either way. Now that we've talked about some variations, let's talk about how to make these hazelnut crunch bars. Start with a quarter cup of hazelnuts, and you really have 2 options for breaking these up. You can either put them into a plastic baggie and use something heavy like a can of beans or a hammer to break them into pieces, or you can do like I did and put them in your food processor and just pulse them until they break up into small pieces. You want the pieces to be about the size of a grain of rice. Even a little bit smaller is okay. It kind of just depends on what texture you're going for. After you break up the hazelnut pieces, it's time to toast them. How long they need to toast on the stovetop is really going to depend on the size of the pieces and whether your hazelnuts were raw or roasted. So take your broken up hazelnuts and pour them into a pan on medium-high heat, and you're going to toast them for 4 to 5 minutes, and you'll just stir them every 30 seconds. So you want them to be on the heat for a little bit, and then you'll give them a stir because you want every part of them to touch the heat and you don't want them to burn, right? You'll know they're ready when they have a nice fragrant hazelnut toasty smell. When those are done, set them aside to cool, and it's time to melt that chocolate. You can either melt the chocolate in a double boiler on the stove, or you could use my lazy cheater microwave method. Put the chocolate chips into a microwave safe bowl. In this case, I'm actually using the Pyrex measuring cup, glass measuring cup that I use to measure the chips because it's microwave safe, and that's one less dish to wash. Then stick it in the microwave, and you're going to do 15 to 45 second bursts of high in the microwave. The duration and how many rounds you'll have to do to melt the chips really depends on your microwave. Mine's not very powerful. Took me 2 45-second rounds. If you have a powerful microwave, it might not take that long, or you might want to do shorter bursts. What's critical is that you stir the chocolate chips in between rounds of microwaving, because you'll pull them out that first time especially. They'll look the same on top as when they went in, but if you give them a stir, you'll see that underneath they've already begun to melt, and even the top ones are meltier than they look. Stirring in between rounds of microwaving allows you to really suss out how melted they are, and it also prevents you from overcooking your chocolate because you do not want to do that. It's a disaster. Once you fully melt your chocolate, it's time to stir in that toasted hazelnut crunchiness and just kind of pour it right in from the pan and stir it with a spoon until everything's evenly mixed. And then it's time to fill the molds. The first time I made chocolate in a chocolate bar mold, it was a huge mess. The entire mold was covered in melted chocolate. It was all over the table. Disaster. So after a couple of tries, I've kind of come to a technique that's worked well for me. What you do is spoon a couple of tablespoons of chocolate into the center of the mold, and then use your spoon to kind of work it to the outside edges. Anytime you're adding chocolate, add it to the center and then work your way out. That way you won't end up with chocolate spilling over the edges, and your chocolate bars will have a nice, clean, crisp edge. Once they're nice and filled with chocolate, you are ready to chill. Stick the mold in your refrigerator and give them 1 to 2 hours to chill. These took about an hour and 15 minutes. It really depends on the temperature of your fridge and how hot your chocolate was. Just keep checking on it until it's nice, hard chocolate bar consistency. Once they've hardened, you can pop them out and you're ready to eat. So when it comes to storing these bars, I like to keep them in an airtight container in the refrigerator or wrap them individually in foil and keep them in the fridge. But you can do the same storage options, but in the pantry. Right now, here in Atlanta anyway, it's warm out, and I did an experiment where I kept one bar in the pantry and one bar in the fridge, and the pantry bar got much too soft. My kitchen is warm, and it was just so melty right from the jump. Because you're using chocolate chips and they're kind of soft and intended to be melty, your chocolate bar is going to be softer than a store-bought bar, so I think the fridge is ideal, but if you like a softer chocolate bar, go for the pantry. Nobody's going to judge you. I hope that this video answered all of your questions about how to make this hazelnut crunch bar. If you have any questions I didn't address in the video, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'm always happy to help. And don't forget to rate and subscribe. Happy cooking!